Hey, I'm Jacob.
And I'm Dan. Jacob, did you enjoy science in school?
You know, it was one of my favorite subjects.
What was the coolest experiment you've ever seen?
You know, not at school, but at camp one time, we took a big watermelon and we placed elastic bands around it one at a time until there was so many and so much pressure that it just exploded.
That's awesome. I think science is so cool, but there's people out there that say that you have to choose between the Bible and science.
Yeah, I know. That's actually what our God story is about today. And we're gonna dig a little deeper into that. Let's watch it now and see what we can learn.
What video game do you play on the toilet? Call of Duty. Hey everyone, welcome. It is the final week of this series. Now, I've got a great story for you. When I was a kid, my mom, whenever we were in the car, would be like, "Why isn't the car starting?" Oh, it's because Aaron doesn't have his seatbelt on. So I, for years, thought a car won't start until the seatbelts are all plugged in. It wasn't until I actually learned to drive that I realized this was not true. My mom had to be lying to me all these years. Now, while it's good to wear your seatbelt, it was a very big misunderstanding of what seatbelts were actually meant for. Now, just like my seatbelt story, sometimes there are misunderstandings that either someone has explained to us wrong or never explained to us at all. One of those things I also grew up with was whether or not we had to believe in the Bible or in science. That led to today's big idea. Do we have to choose between science and the Bible? The quickest, easiest answer to all of that is no, but let me explain a little bit more. Now, the Bible is written to point us to Jesus. It's the account of God's story. But it wasn't meant to be a science textbook. It had a different function than a science textbook. We're gonna take some time to look at a few examples now. Probably the most common one, the one you've all encountered, is the difference between creation and evolution. Do I have to believe in this or this? Can they ever work together? Now, I don't have a biology degree in the slightest. I am not an expert in the category. All I know is that there are people who have years of study, who have doctorates and degrees, who are on this side of camp, and there are people who have years of study and doctorates who are on this side of the argument. Both are very smart people who disagree on the subject. Now, while there are people on both sides of the stories, we should be focusing on the fact that we are all brothers and sisters in Christ. We are all part of God's family. So we got two different possibilities. Number one is that God created Earth in 6 literal days like it says in the Bible. So what about science and evolution? How does that work into that side? Well, God could have created, he is all powerful, he could have created the Earth to appear older than it actually is. And he could have created microevolution to happen now. And then we got possibility number 2, is that the account that we get in Genesis of God creating the world, it's not 6 literal days, it's 6 different time periods. Basically, it's saying that this is a story. It's not important how God created, it's important that he did create. So how does evolution and creation fit into that side? Well, it could be that during one of these time periods, God used evolution to create. There are also a bunch of different options, a lot of different opinions out there on this subject. But the point when we read Genesis 1 isn't, again, how God chose to create, it's that he did create. That's what we're meant to focus on, that he's involved in creation and he has a purpose for it. See, Genesis 1 wasn't meant to be a scientific book. It wasn't meant to lay out exactly the way it happened. It was a story. It was meant to convey a point. Okay, now we're gonna look into the Bible. Not into Genesis 1, but actually into some poetry written by King David. Now, one of David's poems is about creation and how it all points to God. Let's take a look at Psalm 19. The heaven proclaimed the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day, they continue to speak. Night after night, they make him known. They speak without a sound or a word. The voice is never heard. Yet their message has gone throughout the earth, and their words to all the world. God has made a home in the heavens for the sun. It bursts forth like a radiant bridegroom after his wedding. It rejoices like a great athlete eager to run the race. The sun rises at one end of the heavens and follows its course to the other end. Nothing can hide from its heat. What a beautiful poem. It reminds us of God's creation, the beauty, the amazingness that it is. Have you ever had a moment like that where you just look around and be like, this place is so awesome? But notice also what the poem doesn't do. It's not a scientific example of how things work. Did God really set up a home for the sun? Nope. Does the sun really move? Nope. It's a poem, it's a story. When we read the Bible with a scientific mindset, often we're looking for certain answers, but it's not going to give us that because it was never written for that purpose. But what is the purpose? It's that we have a creator who had made a beautiful creation. And this is talked about all throughout the Psalms. Another good one to check out is Psalm 104. What I'd love for you to remember is that the Bible needs to be read within the context that it was written. Because there's something it was written in and something it's read in, and the truth is definitely in there. So as you continue to get older, as you continue to study, let's take a look at science and not apply it to the Bible, but think about how science can explain and say, wow, we have an awesome God who uses science and who uses stories, and they both point back to him. So back to answering, do we have to choose between science and the Bible? I hope you can agree with me that it's a clear no, that God is the God of science and poetry and story and math and beauty and everything. He is the God of it all. That's it for me, everyone, in this series. It was great hanging out with you. See you later.
This was a total eye-opener for me. I grew up knowing that the Bible is God's way of communicating with us, but I think there's a lot of people out there that expect the Bible to explain everything about biology, science, and history, and it was just never written to do all those things.
And it's so weird that we do that too. It's like if we watched a movie and we expected to see why it was made and how it was made, instead of focusing on the story.
Yeah. This is our last week with Natalie, Jimmy, and the kids around the campfire. So let's see what they had to say about science and God.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Campfire. Tonight, we're gonna be talking about God and science. Do you guys have any questions about that kind of thing?
Some things in the Bible don't match science. What's the deal with that?
The Bible is not a science textbook. It's not. It never was. It was never designed to be that way. It tells God's story, and more importantly, it tells God's story with us. And so when people come with a Bible saying that it explains science or proves science or has to be one way, they're actually just wrong. It would be like if your history teacher came into your math class and started telling you about like the ancient Near East. You'd be like, I thought this was math class. Is there no addition or subtraction? It's kind of the same thing. The Bible is God's story and God's story with us. It refers to how the world works and how people interact with the world, but it does not, as a point, try and explain, scientific reason or anything like that.
Jesus says the mustard seed is the smallest seed, but it's not. Is he wrong?
Jesus lived actually in a certain culture and a time and a place. We call it the ancient Near East. And in that time, in that place, they actually believed that the mustard seed was the smallest of the seeds. And so Jesus wasn't wrong. He was making a point about something way bigger, way more important than what seed was actually the smallest of the seeds. But he used something that they knew in their own culture to make a big point about this whole idea of God's kingdom. So was he wrong? Well, to us, it might have sounded like he was, but in reality, in the actual culture that he lived in, they would have not had any questions about it.
Sometimes people put God and science on two sides of an argument. I'm kind of confused in this situation. Should I go with God or science?
Should I go with God or science? The answer is yes. Both. Both are, again, God is the originator of science. He's the divine energy that was breathed out and the world came about as a result. Now, you can believe one version or the other, but the way that the world works is actually filled with beauty, filled with specificity, filled with wonder, and that was intentional. So there's no reason to put God over here. If you're thinking about God, you can't think about science, or science over here. If you have a scientific mind or you're passionate about science, you can't believe in God. To exclude them both is sort of silly, right? It would be like, I like cereal, but I don't like milk. Well, no, they both go together. So it's kind of the same thing. Make sense? Yeah.
Man, again, great questions, you guys. I love that you're thinking about these kinds of things. And we're going to come back next time with more awesome questions. But for now, peace out.
When Jimmy explained the story of the mustard seed, it's like a light went on in my head. But what do we do when we stumble across another story where the facts seem a bit off?
We have to look for the message inside the story. We have to remember that the Bible isn't a history or science textbook. If we don't know about the culture of the time, we can ask our parents or a youth leader for more historical context.
That sounds pretty great. For now, we're gonna break into our small groups and see what this looks like in our lives.